In this video, I will show you how to send custom events to Google Analytics 4. Hey, my name is Julius and welcome to the Analytics Mania YouTube channel, where I teach people how to work with Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. So if you want to stay up to date with GA4, then subscribe to this channel. In Google Analytics 4, there are several types of events. For example, automatically tracked events and recommended events. But if you have some event in mind that does not match any of those previous types, in that case, you can send custom events. And in this video, I will show you how to do that. In Google Analytics 4, there is a list of recommended events. You don't have to do this and you can name your events whatever you want, but it is recommended to use these events. For example, if we talk about the purchase event, and together with that event you also send some additional data in a particular structure, then that information will be available in reports, monetization reports, for example, and e-commerce purchases. So even though you don't have to use this particular naming convention, Google still recommends that you use this first. So when you have some event in mind, you should first go to the list of recommended events, check the list of those event names, and if you find something useful or something related to your particular need, then use that event name. But if you have some custom idea in mind, then that is fine. You can send any event name that you want, as long as that event name is no longer than 40 characters. So here I have some demo page, and let's say that I want to track when a visitor sees this image in the browser window. In the list of recommended events, there is one event which is called View Promotion. But let's say that in this case, this image is not a promotion. This is just some other website element, but I still want to track the impressions of this image, meaning that every time this image is displayed, I want to track it and want to send an event to GA4. So let's take a look how can we do that. So first of all, I have already installed Google Tag Manager container on this website, and that container is pretty empty. The only tag that I have here is GA4 configuration tag, and in this video, I presume that you already have it. If you are completely new to GA4, then I will post a link to another tutorial below this video where I teach how to install GA4. After you watch it, you will know what this tag means and how to configure it. Now let's go to this particular image. So my goal now here is to send an event to GA4 when this image appears on the screen. And for that, in Google Tag Manager, there is a particular trigger. So you should go to Triggers, New, Trigger Configuration, and then select Element Visibility. Here we have to enter some element information that we want to track. And in this case, that's the image. There are two ways how you can use select the element. It is either with an ID, if your element has it, or with a CSS selector. This second option is much more advanced, and I will not cover it in this particular video. Now let's check if our element has an ID. So I will do right click, inspect, and in this case, I'm lucky. I see that the image has the ID. So I will double click it, copy, and then we'll paste it right here. Now there are some additional settings. For example, how often do you want that element visibility event to be fired? Do we want to fire it once per page? So for example, if the visitor scrolls down, the event fires. If I then later scroll up, then the event would not fire because this trigger would be activated only once. Then another option is once per element. For example, maybe you have several elements that you target with this trigger. So then this trigger will fire once per element, or if you want, you can fire it every time the element appears on the screen. So it will fire once here, then it will fire once again if I scroll up, and so on. So let's say that in this case, I want to fire it only once per page. And then in this case, I want to make sure that the element is fully visible on the screen. So I want to target 100%. And also let's say that I want to make sure that the visitor has seen this element at least for a couple of seconds. That is why I will select set minimum on-screen duration, and then I will enter 2000 milliseconds, which is 2 seconds. Now let's name this trigger. We can call this, let's say, very important image, and then click save. Now let's test if this is working. So let's click preview. Then in this field, we should enter the URL of the page where we want to test this and click connect. The tag assistant has connected. If it hasn't connected in your case, then check the description of the video where I will post some additional resources to troubleshoot your issue. So let's scroll down. Let's stay for 2 seconds. And then our element visibility event is visible right here. No tag has fired yet because we haven't configured any tags yet. Let's do that now. Let's go to Google Tag Manager, Tags, new, tag configuration, Google Analytics 4 event. Then let's select our existing configuration tag because this event tag will inherit certain settings from this configuration tag. And then let's enter the event name. There is no recommended event name for our case. That is why we can enter any name we want. So I could say that maybe in the future I will be tracking more events and their appearance. Therefore, let's call this event element appeared or something like that. Again, I came up with this event name and you can come up with your own, and that is perfectly fine as long as the length of this event name is no longer than 40 characters. Then, if we're looking at the future, we might have more elements with the same tracking setup. And I mean, when the element appears on the screen, therefore, I think it would be useful to add some parameter that we can call, let's say, element ID or element name. Basically, some parameter that would help us describe what kind of element appeared on the screen. So in that case, we have the ID parameter right here. So we could use the value of this variable and we could send it as the value of element ID. And then in the future, when we track another event and do that with the element visibility trigger, we could then use that event's ID and Google Tag Manager would handle this automatically. So to access this ID as a variable, we can actually use one of the built-in variables. Now, this part is a bit unintuitive, but just bear with me. So in Google Tag Manager, you can enable built-in variables such as click variables, form variables, and other variables. So for now, let's just save this tag as it is. We will later come back to it. So in variables section of Google Tag Manager, you can click configure and see what kind of built-in variables can be enabled. So if you want to access the ID of the element that was displayed, you can use either click ID or form ID because they basically do the same thing and they access elements ID parameter or ID attribute. So if you haven't enabled this variable yet, please click this checkbox now, and then let's come back to our tags. So I will click this Google Analytics GA4 event tag, and here I will insert the variable click ID. So click this button and then select click ID. Then let's name this tag. I usually name it like that, GA4 event, and then the name of the event. So element appeared, and then the triggering. Luckily, in our case, we already have a configured trigger. So click anywhere right here and then select the element visibility trigger. Now let's test if this is working. Click save, click preview. Now the page has reloaded. Let's go to Google Analytics 4, configure, and debug view. Since we have enabled Google Tag Manager preview mode, it automatically enables Google Analytics 4 debug view. So all events that are tracked right here with the preview mode will be visible right here. We have user engagement, we have page view. Now let's scroll down to that image right here. In the preview mode, I see the element visibility. I click it, the tag has fired. You can click it and you can see what kind of values were sent as long as you have enabled the values right here. Now let's go to the debug view, and here we have the event element appeared. You can click it and you can see that one of the parameters is element ID, and here is the value. This is the value because that's the value of the variable click ID right here when we have selected the element visibility trigger. So when you have tested this properly and you see that everything works, then you will need to submit your changes and publish your container so that these changes would go live to your website visitors. However, we are not done yet because if you want to see that element ID parameter, and I mean this parameter right here in reports of Google Analytics 4, you have to register it as a custom dimension because there is no built-in element ID parameter. So let's go to Google Analytics 4, configure, custom definitions, create custom dimensions, and then here you should enter the name that you want to assign to that particular parameter. So it can be something like element ID. This is what you will see in your reports as the label for that parameter. Make sure that the scope is event in this case. If you want, you can enter some description, but this field is optional. And then here you have to enter the very same parameter name that is configured right here. So you can copy this, paste it right here. Don't worry that you don't see any suggestions. This is a new parameter, so you won't have any suggestions right here, and click save. And now within the next 24 hours, you will be able to use that parameter and that dimension in your Google Analytics 4 reports. One of the places where you will be able to use that is the exploration section right here. So click explore, then you can create new freeform. And then here in the dimensions, you can click plus, add that element ID dimension, and then, for example, build a report where you want to see how many times was each element displayed. In our case, we have only one element, but let's imagine that we have more elements with the same setup. So in that case, you could add element ID to rows. You can remove columns. In the values section, you can add event count. And right now we don't see any values because 24 hours still haven't passed. And then in the filters, we could click right here and narrow down just to particular events, which in this case is element appeared. So I can click event name. If event name exactly matches this name right here, which is element appeared, like that, and I click apply, then you will see that table. The reason why I don't see it is because not enough time has passed. And Google Analytics 4 needs some time, usually up to 24 hours, to process that data. So right now I cannot see any table, but with this particular configuration, you will be able to see that data the next day. Of course, after you publish your Google Tag Manager container and your website visitors actually interact with this element by seeing it on the browser window. So to sum up, you can send any event names that you want to Google Analytics 4 if they are not very long. But before you do that, check the list of recommended events. If you cannot find your event here, then feel free to use any event name that you want. If you send some additional parameters and those parameters are custom, then you will need to register them as event scoped custom dimensions. And that is how you can send custom events to Google Analytics 4. Keep in mind that this video is just scratching the surface of what you should learn about Google Analytics 4. If you want to really learn Google Analytics 4 and benefit from it, then take a look at my course. I will post a link to the course below the video. If you found this video useful, then hit the thumbs up button below the video because it helps me continue working on this channel. Also, if you want to learn more about Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics 4, then consider subscribing to this channel. My name is Julius, this is Analytics Mania, and I'll see you in the next video.